Hi, welcome to today's episode of Speak Greasy at Mac Street Kitchen, where we talk to those who've delighted us with their food right here in this kitchen. My guest today is Azmat Ali Mir, who is the founder of Sarposh, a restaurant based out of Bangalore that specializes in Kashmiri cuisine. So welcome to Magazine Street Kitchen, Azmat. It's so wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Gauri. It's an honor.
And I'm so thrilled because you're doing your first pop-up outside of your restaurant with us here in Bombay. And I know I can't wait to try everything. But let's get right into it. And, what on earth made you start a restaurant? And tell us a little bit about yourself. And, you're obviously from Kashmir. So how did you end up in Bangalore?
So I was born and brought up in Kashmir. I did my computer science engineering. And post that, I moved to Bangalore in 2018 when I got married. I followed the natural progression of a computer science engineer getting into a corporate job. But I think I very quickly realized this is not where my heart belongs. This is not something that I am enjoying doing. And as a Kashmiri who wears her Kashmiri heart on her sleeve, I think it was just a matter of time that something like Sarposh would pop up in my life.
I'm someone who went from a non-F&B background into having restaurants, and I know it's not the easiest business to be in.
Who asked me about it?
That we'll save that for off the record. But how did you start?
So it's a very interesting story. When I moved to Bangalore, I got married into a non-Kashmiri family, and I think the fact that my non-Kashmiri family did not understand my culture, my food, and my cuisine as much was one of those things that triggered a thought in my head. But everything sort of had happened by chance. I was just homesick. I wanted a taste of home, and I wanted to bring a bunch of people together, because when you move into a different space where people don't understand where you're coming from, your language, your food, it gets very lonely very fast. And I just wanted to put together something where people could, maybe just talk in Kashmiri, have a conversation in Kashmiri, and be able to eat and connect over Kashmiri food. This small idea where I wanted to do something at home grew into something much larger, which became this massive event with 1,000 people in attendance, most of them Kashmiris. Over 800 at least were Kashmiris. So we flew in bands, poets, comedians, artists during that entire phase. And when we actually did that, I really wanted the entire experience to also be about the food, because nothing brings people.
This was one event?
It was one event.
Wow.
Yeah, so I flew in this team of chefs, or Wazas as they're called in Kashmir, who cooked for my own wedding. They've been associated with our family for generations. And everything that I'd really had in the name of Kashmiri food in Bangalore before that was horrible. I mean, I'll be very blunt and honest about it. It was just too bad a representation, and I felt that the cuisine is one of the most exquisite cuisines to exist, with so much happening, so many interesting elements, so much science into it. So I really wanted to kind of
to do justice to that.
Yeah, a very honest representation of that food. So when this team of chefs flew in, they cooked the food. People absolutely loved it, and most of them were Kashmiris, so I was sure that they would. But I still needed more evidence that this is something that would work in a city like Bangalore. I spent about a year juggling my corporate job with this little passion baby of mine, where we would set up stalls, do pop-ups, do events across the city, just to understand whether people would accept something like this and whether they had a palate for something like this. And once we, had a fair sense of where this is going, we just took the plunge, and, here we are.
Yeah, well, and then you opened Sarposh in
2020. Yes.
Right, and of course then disaster struck all of us. But, what was that like? You just opened the restaurant, and, of course we know it all worked out well because you're here today. But, what was that like? And especially because you were new to the business, so to speak.
I think it was really hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I remember we had just about finished the interiors and were about to announce the launch date. And in the evening, the lockdown got announced. So it was such a big...
So you hadn't actually...
We hadn't even opened. We hadn't even had a single day of operations. And when you put your heart and soul into a place, I still remember that moment of, just setting up the restaurant, setting up the tables and the chairs and, having the setup in place and deciding when we would start doing trials and announce the, launch date. And then the entire team having to come and pick everything back up, put it back in the boxes that we just opened them out of. And, turning over the chairs and putting them over the table. I still remember that. And it was such a gut-wrenching feeling. Because it's one thing to fail, after trying. But it's...
You didn't even get the chance to try.
Completely another thing when you've not even tried. So that was really hard. And I remember almost giving up. But I took a quick rejuvenating trip back to Kashmir. And I think that reminded me why I did something like this in the first place. I remember sitting my parents down and telling them I've reached the end of my rope here and I don't think I can pull this any longer. I quit my job by then. My husband had gotten involved in the restaurant and, there were huge financial commitments. And with COVID, his business was suffering. I had nothing to kind of look back to. And my parents just said, if it's really just about the money, we're going to pitch in, but why are you really giving up? You've put in so much. All we're asking is just let this organically do what it needs to do till December. And if you don't think it's going to work beyond that, we support you and, you can shut it down. With that in mind, I remember it was the 2nd of September. I flew back to Bangalore from Kashmir. And I remember standing at the door of my restaurant and opening that door and thinking to myself, this is it. Till the 31st of December, I'm going to leave this door open and see if people walk in. If they do, well and good. It's going to hurt like hell, but if they don't, I will close this door without having any hard feelings about it.
Well, it's safe to say people swarmed in and, here we are today. So amazing. And, you're right. This industry is one that requires a lot of resilience, a lot of patience, and nothing comes easy or fast. So, well done to you. And I'm glad it all worked out in the end. Let's talk a little bit about the food. So tell us a little bit about the Wazwan and of course the Wazas who are the cooks who are trained to cook the Wazwan. What is the special sort of qualification in a way that, allows you to call yourself a Waza?
I think I'll try and address this in two parts. I think the first part would be why Wazwan in the first place. Kashmir is one of those places that is extremely vulnerable to people having opinions about it. And there are all sorts of opinions that come from all sorts of people. Yet, there's very little understanding. And when it comes to the food of the region, I think that reflects in the overall lack of understanding. Wazwan is one of those things that people, when you talk about Kashmiri food, it's the first thing that comes to people's mind, even if they don't really know anything about it. But the popularity in that sense has never really translated to the food being represented in the right manner. You find a lot of restaurants serving things which they call a Rogan Josh or a Kashmiri pulao, interpretations and representations.
Bastardized version in a way of the food, which is
For me, the reason Wazwan was the first place that we started because it was one of those things that people knew something about, but not quite. And we wanted to start from the basics. We wanted to start from dispelling all the misconceptions around the food by doing it right in the first place and telling people what it really is in the first place and then moving on to the other things. As you said, there's no specific qualification to become a Waza like there is to become a chef. Wazas are actually a community of people from the Shina-speaking Gurez region who inherited the craft of preparing this food. And it is till date a very closely guarded secret. Of course, there are a lot of people who get involved in the profession now out of will and choice and out of the amount of money it pays. And as you said, it's Kashmir's festive tradition. It's Kashmir's way of showing hospitality. Wazwan is one of those things which is the zenith of Kashmiri hospitality, I would say. But there are a lot of people who are getting involved in the profession, but it takes years for most of them to even reach the point where they can be called an apprentice.
Wow.
So there's a lot of manual labor that goes into it. There's a lot of science, but a Vaza, the head chef of sorts, or the Vaza who really, the head Vaza usually just inherits the craft. And I'm a firm believer of the kind of flavors that certain hands have within them. There's some sort of magic that certain hands are blessed with, and I think that community is blessed with that magic, and that's how they continue that tradition, which is true with a lot of professions in Kashmir, including the professions of bakers as well. So, a lot of these are passed down crafts and all of that. That said, I mean, of course, Wazwan is celebratory in nature, but there's so much more to Kashmiri food as well. There's a lot of vegetarian dishes that are done.
I was going to ask you that because, we tend to associate Kashmiri food with a lot of meat and
a lot of spice.
Yeah, well, spice, but the dairy, the meat, not as much vegetables because obviously it's a very harsh winter. So what's the veg? The common ingredients like morels and the hak saag, and I know you're doing a whole you have a whole vegetarian part of your menu, and you're doing a vegetarian wazwan as well. But tell us a little bit more about the vegetarian food.
One small correction, I would say, there's no such thing as a vegetarian wazwan.
Yeah.
A wazwan is a meat-heavy, multi-course meal. Certain vegetarian dishes have gotten incorporated into the wazwan over the last 60, 70 years, but traditionally the wazwan's always been about meat. The vegetarian dishes, though, are things that Kashmiris eat fairly often. Like you said, the morels are one of the most well-known ingredients available, yet it's one of those things that 90% of Kashmiris would not have tasted or eaten ever in their lives.
Really?
It's one of those things that is exclusively for marketing. It's one of those things that's foraged exclusively to be able to sell it and not to consume
I had no
it.
idea.
The haq, on the other hand, which is the Kashmiri equivalent, like haq with rice is the Kashmiri equivalent to a dal chawal, is the poor man and the rich man's food. It's everyone's food. It's universal. So you'll find that in all houses. But Kashmir has 6 seasons, as opposed to the regular beliefs that there are 4 seasons. There are 6 seasons in Kashmir. And every season, there's a new form of produce that grows and a new form of produce that is used. Kashmiris have also really always followed this mantra of garam and sarad, which means
heaty and
so
cooling down.
Is cooling in nature, and a certain dish is sort of warming in nature in a certain sense. But it's also interchangeable in what form you're using it. So of course, with the arrival of spring and summer, there are a lot of greens that grow in. I think there are about 30 odd varieties of greens that Kashmiris eat.
And you bring, I'm guessing these are not available locally in Bangalore, so you would bring them in.
Yeah, all of it flies directly. A lot of the ingredients that we use at Sarposh fly in directly from Kashmir, even though some of them may be available in the Bangalore market. But we are strong believers of the hawa pani of Kashmir being a certain way and doing
It's
certain
one of the
things.
key ingredients. And
It is one of the ingredients in all of the food that you eat at Sarposh. So all of that. But I think there are very interesting traditions that you get towards autumn and summer, where a whole host of vegetables are dried and stored for the winter, which are then consumed in winter. So like a bottle gourd is sarad in summers when it's used fresh. But when you cut silvers out of it and sun dry it in autumn and then cook it in winters, it has a garam tasir. So all of those interesting traditions that exist.
Does what you eat change quite drastically, not just in terms of ingredients, because it could be the same ingredient, but just in a different, like fresh versus a dried. So does that change the dishes also that you tend to eat over the year?
I think we're now living in a world that is so connected that these conversations, even though are very important to your food ecosystems, have sort of started taking a back seat. I can get a bottle guard, a fresh bottle guard, in the peak of winter in Kashmir now because, supplies are coming from all over the world. But back in the day when the only connection to the outside world used to be through the Silk Route, which used to get snowed up in the winter, and you had to rely on local produce and you had to rely on what was locally available, people had to find ways to be able to save products for, the winter months, the harsh winter. And winters used to be much harsher than they are now, thanks to climate change. So all of those factors, I think a lot of these conversations are not being spoken about as often because the impact is not as much, but we're not realizing the kind of impact that having on our overall food ecosystems. Yeah.
So again, coming back to what you serve in the restaurant, so, is it that what can people experience other than the dishes that are traditionally part of a Wazwan?
So with every change of season, we try and make sure we fly in specific produce that is available during those times. We fly in lotus stems. We fly in, even though, you get lotus stems from Bangalore and you get it from Mysore and all those places, they just don't cut it for us. We fly in our lotus stem directly from Kashmir. Of course, the haak is something that forms a regular feature of our menu. We also fly in bumsont, which is quince, which is a sour, tangy fruit vegetable that gets prepared in Kashmir quite a lot. And that's something that flies in. All sorts of different Kashmiri greens, which include your red amaranthus, your mallow, dried dandelion. These are things that fly in. We use a lot of spring onion every once in a while, especially in the vegetarian fare. When it comes to the meaty affair, I think you really cannot beat the Wazwan. We also do, when it comes to the dried vegetables, we do things like dried turnips. We fly in our rajma from the Badarwa region of Kashmir, where you get the best rajma. So we really pick and choose what you get where. And it's not just these specific ingredients which form, which are the heroes of the dishes that we are making, but also small ingredients that have big impact. The cumin that we use is the Himalayan cumin, and it's foraged from Dras and Gurez. And that's something that...
And it's a different flavor.
It's a different flavor altogether. The dried mint that we use, and mint is available everywhere, right? But we grow our own mint in Kashmir. Most of it still grows in my own kitchen garden. It gets dried there in the sun, hawa pani of Kashmir, and flies into Bangalore and is used in our food. Our Kashmiri red chilies that we use, we've been through an entire year of research to be able to get the right chili in place, and we now have a whole bunch of farmers that grow it for us. With the Wazwan, the most important ingredient that you have is the pran, which are the wild shallots, which form the base of the gravy, because there is no onion, no ginger, no garlic, no tomato in any of the food in Wazwan at all. Not even oil. It's all ghee. So the pran is a very important ingredient, and it has a very short growing span between June and July, which is when you have to harvest it, you have to clean it, you have to process it, and you have to keep it for the rest of the year. So you'll always find me in Kashmir during those months. And it's a beautiful time to be, so I'm not complaining.
You were talking about sort of the smaller ingredients, but also the spices, right? Like in the spices that we're used to eating and, in our, the food of this region is something I understand isn't as common in Kashmiri food. And you use very different spices so tell us a little bit about that as well.
So in most Indian food, or I would say most South Asian food, Southeast Asian, like the subcontinent region, the base masalas that form, the flavor profile for your food would be turmeric, chili, then you'll use cumin powder and you're going to use coriander powder.
Right.
But the major flavors that you get in Kashmiri food come from, of course, chili, turmeric, but it's fennel seed powder and dry ginger powder. So it's a lot of fennel that comes through. It's a lot of dry ginger that comes through. And it's not just that. It's also, the use of mustard oil in home food, whether it's Pandit style or whether it's Muslim style. The use of hing by Kashmiri Pandits, whereas Kashmiri Muslims would use either Himalayan garlic or pran to get that, the wild shallot, to get that absolute zing in the flavor food. So all of these differences in how Kashmiri masala is made, like, you see most of your subcontinent masalas being made in onions and tomatoes and, these spices, but it's completely different. So the flavor profile is completely different.
Well, I've been listening to you sort of talking about the menu, for Mac Street Kitchen, and I can't wait to try it. But let's talk a little bit about the drinks. I mean, that's something that kava again is one of the most popular, and what people. I mean, I love kava, and I know it's a winter. It's something that's drunk more in the winter. Is that fair to say? But now people just drink it through the year.
I think kava is a beverage of choice across seasons. It's like chai. Even if it's 40 degrees, people who drink chai will drink chai. Similarly, people who drink kava or noon chai for that matter would. More than kava, I think noon chai is one of those things that really is a Kashmiri traditional drink that Kashmiris would drink. Kava is more of something that would be served, and there's not, you don't have just one version of kava. There are multiple versions of kava. You have a saffron kava. Then there's a story that keeps doing the rounds where they say that there was this one guy who took a pot of boiling water, added 11 ingredients into it, had a sip and said, "Wah." Ka in Kashmiri is 11. So ka, wah. So, there are weird stories.
I feel cheated because you made this with like 4, but it's really good.
There are multiple versions. There's a doodh kava version, which is made with milk as well, which is exclusively served to the bridegroom the first time he comes to the bride's house. So you've got all these versions of kava happening. But if there's a drink that truly defines Kashmiri, Kashmiri beverage culture, I would say it's the noon chai.
Which, by the way, is not chai that you drink at noon. It's salty chai, right? So that's something I think that most. I know in Bombay, like chai is such a cutting chai, and it's like sweet as hell. So people, what's behind sort of noon chai and drink? I mean, is it eaten with maybe sweet snacks, and that's sort of how it's balanced out?
So with Kashmiri food, there's a very interesting thing happening. Every time you try talking about one specific segment of Kashmiri food, it leads you into another. And then there's another culture that you start exploring. So there's a whole bread culture around.
Right. I mean, I wanted to talk about that because we're in a venue that produces bread, but very different from Kashmir bread. So, yeah, So
there's a whole bread culture that gets associated when you start talking about Kashmiri teas. There's, if you ask me, I would probably have two distinct versions of the bread culture. One would be the traditional bakeries called the Kandurvans, which have, these sunken earthen pit tandoors, which are wood-fired and, very traditional, very similar to your tandoors. And the breads that come out of them are very similar to your Central Asian breads. And on the other hand, you have your colonial hangover breads, the English-inspired tea culture that you have in Kashmir. Interestingly, in Kashmir, all of your cutting chai or your regular chai, irrespective of what brand it is called Lipton chai.
Oh,
yeah. So
what great branding for Lipton.
Free branding since forever. So it's irrespective of what brand it is a Lipton chai. And those are generally served with your traditional bakery breads where, you have cakes, you have cream buns and eclairs and pastries and patties, which are like a huge, huge part of Kashmiri culture. But it's the traditional breads which are in these small hole-in-the-wall shops. It's also very similar to how you have bread culture in places like Goa, where there's a community bakery and everybody goes and buys their own bread. So, you buy your bread in the morning and that's what's had with your noon chai. So there's a whole host of breads that we do in Kashmir, ranging from your girda sort to your lavasa, to your chachawar, shirmal, bakir khani. And your shirmal and bakir khani are vastly different from what the subcontinent in general considers shirmal and bakir, or kulcha for that matter. A kulcha is like a cookie, and it's got poppy seeds sprinkled on it. So different kinds, and kulchas are very often had with kava. Shirmal is had with kava, which is also crispy, flaky, sweetened bread. But with the noon chai, it's always these breads which are generally lathered on with butter. You break them apart, you add them to your tea, and it's almost like you're having soup. So that's how the flavor profile is.
It's something that isn't, unlike other cuisines around India, it just hasn't spread its wings as widely. And I think you're doing an incredible job. And of course, if you're in Bangalore, please visit Sarposh, and hopefully one day we will find you opening in Bombay as well. So I say that for selfish reasons, but yeah, hopefully. So, I really wish you all the best, and I can't wait to eat everything. Make my way through the menu.
I'm looking forward to serving everybody in Bombay. It's, it's been super exciting for us. This is the first time we've stepped outside of our kitchen. So it's, quite like stepping outside of our comfort zone, but your entire team and has made it a super easy journey. So we couldn't have asked for a better team to do this with.
Right.
Thank you so much.